This is a really important time in our institution. This year we're celebrating, earlier this year, in November of this year, the 175th anniversary of the very first students registered in U.C.C. Next year it'll be 180 years since the very first blocks went in. And if you're up in the main campus, all the wooden floorboards in the Old Maxwell in my office are Latvian pine, and they all came in through Cork Harbour when the construction happened. The Old Maxwell was described as one of the best buildings in the country at that time. And the president at that time, Robert Kane, on the night of it opened, there were 800 people in the Old Maxwell, and he spoke for 2 hours. So wow. Settle in and get ready for all of that. But maybe just for a moment, just to George Boole, there were 115 students started in U.C.C. and the very first registered. The very first registered student was the son of the professor of surgery. But the second student registered was from Lincoln. Almost certainly influenced to come to U.C.C. because of George Boole. So in that time there were 115 students. They were all male. The faculties of arts included, and faculty of law and the faculty of medicine were the 3 faculties, and they peppered everything into all of those. There were 115 students, all male. International students came from Mayo and from a powerful gentleman that came from Lincoln. But today, of course, this great institution has 25,000 students, 4,000 international students from 124 countries, and 3,500 staff. So the transformation has been unrecognisable, and it's a huge privilege for me to lead this great institution. Back to Des and I met Geoffrey Hinton earlier in the year, so that was a really special moment for a number of us. But when I picked up the book, and I brought it to Dublin on the train with me, and it's a book that I love because I can dip in on it, and I suppose the question I was asking myself, what am I going to learn new, or what am I going to refresh myself on it? And I got some really extraordinary insights, and I suppose let's talk about Boole the teacher for a minute. And I just love at the beginning, George Boole respectfully informs his friends and the public that his academy for Free School Lane will be open on Monday, the 18th of January 1836. The course of instruction there will adopted includes branches of English education, writing, arithmetic, and Latin, Greek and languages, mathematics, and their applications. And there's a lovely sentence, paragraph which you've written, both of you, Yvonne and Des, and over the page it says, Boole believed that education should be well balanced. And you know, that's something brings us right up to today. Students mainly interested in science and mathematics should also devote time to study of literature, languages and classics. A language should be learned through speaking it and reading its literature before focusing on the rules of grammar. He recommended German as a suitable modern language for those not interested in Latin or Greek. And it was really quite extraordinary that he understood the impact of, maybe you could say today, of accommodation. You know, I chaired the primary school board of management for 6 years in Ballinlough. Some of you might know it, or Lady Lourdes, and Yvonne, you know it, and your husband. And the principal there was a wonderful West Cork woman, and she said to me, John, you know, you can't educate a hungry child. And what's really interesting, in George Boole himself says, a happy childhood is an important element in the formation of a virtuous character. Generally, when the conditions of childhood has been one of suffering, especially if that suffering has been caused by unkindness or injurious effects of this violation of nature's order, will be felt as an afterlife. There's something really powerful in that, actually, understanding the deep impact of childhood learning. And it was really striking to me. So when obviously Boole started out in his earlier life as a teacher, he was really absolutely committed to understanding learning, but also to understand the importance of the history and how people have grown up during that period. And of course, then if we move on to, I'm just going to dip into another page because it really is really striking. Then as we move maybe to his time in U.C.C, and maybe things haven't, my colleagues are going to kill me now because maybe things haven't changed, because George Boole applied for a job, and I think you set this out, there were over 650 applied for the first professorships in U.C.C, and I think he applied in late summer, and by October he got really fed up because it took too long, so he withdrew his application. Is that correct? Some might say, geez, that happens today, maybe it does. Leave that for now. But he actually was encouraged to put his application back in. Lucky for us. Lucky for us. I mean, that's how life can be so on an edge all the time, and the extraordinary things that can happen. The legacy is quite extraordinary, and let's stick with the research for a moment. And Barry O'Sullivan's here, and Barry, you were very kind to me. Some of you might have forgotten this, Barry, but you know, you remind me of the laws of thought, and you remind me of all the work that was going on there. So some of you might remember 2009. Described in Cork the Great Flood. So this building this room that you're in, actually, the water was up to here. There's 20 million euros worth of damage done to the university. And Barry, if I'm correct, you reminded me in the Laws of Thought, where George Boole from his house in Granville Terrace, looking out onto the river, describes that this area is subject to flooding by the river and by the sea. And the equations are there. So this is a remarkable person, doing remarkable things. So this building was built in floodplain in Northern Mall, and some of you, if you don't know it, if you think of you're standing outside the Mercy Hospital and you're looking into the areas with trees, there's an old bottling plant there which was completely untouched by the floods. But the more modern buildings were completely damaged underwater. Look, the Laws of Thought, I don't need to say very much about, because people in this room know much more about that than I. But for me, I suppose it's really quite extraordinary that at one level something so simple can be explained to me so simply, can be so important and make such a contribution to the world in which we live in. I'm going to jump for a minute, because one of the interesting things when Geoffrey Hinton got his Nobel Prize, I sent out in social media, because Des and I had met him and Sarah Collety, and I put out in social media that George Boole and his wife Mary Everest, great-great-grandson of Geoffrey Hinton. And amazing the response from people saying, at last Mary Everest was recognised. Because George Boole couldn't have had a child himself, and something dramatic would have happened. And it was interesting to see that response. And what's really striking in the book, where he describes, and you've picked it up beautifully, on page 116 he says, "As to myself, I feel more devoted to a life of science, and my recent holiday will, I hope, only send me back to my old pursuits with great ardour. I have such great objects to work for in the persecution of my own studies and the college work that I do not think I'm likely to complain of the dullness of solitary life." But the arrival of Mary Everest changed everything at that moment. And that was quite an extraordinary moment in his life, and for all of us. Luckily, Mary Everest came along, because as you know, the rest is really history from that point of view. And on the last paragraph before the appendices of the book, it's a beautiful example. It says, "Finally, there's George Boole, the human legacy. He believed he was doomed to perpetual bachelorhood, but at the age of 39 fell in love and married Mary Everest," which of course you know is the niece of George Everest, after which the mountains is named. At the age of 39 he fell in love with Mary Everest, and they had 5 very talented daughters: a poet, a medical artist, a mathematician, a chemist, and a world-famous novelist. Further generations produced an outstanding applied mathematician. The next one really made me smile, an entomologist, because I'm a zoologist, and suddenly there's an entomologist appearing in George Boole's genealogy. A physicist, an inventor, a psychologist, and a medical scientist. And in recent decades, a computer scientist, which has been called the godfather of artificial intelligence, of course, is Geoffrey Hinton, who, of course, as you know, won the Nobel Prize about 6 weeks ago or so in physics for his work on artificial intelligence. So lucky that we had Mary Everest and those extraordinary women who did extraordinary things. I think we must always, when we're in our conversations about George Boole, remind ourselves of the importance of Mary Everest. And certainly this is what came out in the book for me, which was really lovely to see. So we see Boole as a son, we see Boole as a father, we see Boole as a husband, we see Boole as a university professor, and maybe some of you, most of you are probably too young in the audience to remember the ice bucketing that used to go on television, people ice bucketing. I think Mary Everest probably did the very first ice bucketing, because you know that George Boole had a very nasty infection, and she threw some ice on him, and of course the rest is history there too. So look, this is an extraordinary time, and you've captured for me some beautiful narratives. I dipped into it in various points, and I found these beautiful gems. As Des reminded me earlier, in the previous book that I've read, because I'm an ornithologist, I moved in on the eagles. I didn't find any eagles flying around this one, but for me, it was really justifying the extraordinary impact that Boole has had on this institution. So coming right back then to where Des and I met with Sarah Collety with Geoffrey Hinton in April of this year, and it was an interesting moment, I think, really. I was really taken by, and you know that he resigned from Google because he's worried about some of the algorithms associated with artificial intelligence. I was really taken by his real concern, genuine felt concern about the negative impacts of artificial intelligence. And I think it's something that we all have to reflect on. And And for those of you, maybe very few people were at the conferring ceremonies this year, but I talked about artificial intelligence at the conferring ceremonies, and some of it's very hidden, we don't see it. Like the bots and things that are driving it, all the messaging and the notification. Some is very obvious. And I had the example this year of traveling for U.C.C. in San Francisco. I went to Consul General, and I came out, and when I came out, there was a U.C.C. alumnus working there. We have a special treat for you. I had no idea what it was. Next minute, the Waymo came. If you don't know what a Waymo is, the Waymo is a driverless car.
Wow.
So the car came up to me, the door opened. I foolishly sat in the front seat. My two colleagues sat in the back seat, and we drove down to the streets of San Francisco, probably 30-40 miles an hour. And then we got to the hotel, just dropped us off, the three of us, and this car just went off to the distance on its own, with all these cameras and flashes and everything. So that's kind of obvious element of technology being advanced in extraordinary ways. But most importantly, I think, is what Jeff warned us, is that look, this is a really important technology. But I was with colleagues earlier in medicine. There was a lovely ceremony earlier in medicine, and Liam and Mary, your daughter, was there, and Liam was there, and I comment on the importance of technology for the purpose of medicine, and it's incredibly useful for imagery and digital. So you can never give up on the compassionate hand, compassionate heart, and the intelligent mind. So, you know, while these are really important technologies, which were actually on the base of what happened in this institution, which Yvonne and Des, through their lifetime, and particularly Des and Yvonne together, have shone the light in this extraordinary scholar. So to me, the book contains an elementary exposition of the set theory of truth, tables, electronic circuits, which they say can be understood by anybody. I couldn't understand any of it, but anyway. But most importantly, it provides huge evidence to me of justifying calling George Boole the father of modern semantics. Yvonne and Des, congratulations. It's a fantastic piece of work.
Thanks, friends and family, for coming here tonight. It's a terrible night, so thank you for making the effort to come out in the rain and the wind, and for being here for the launch of the Essential George Boole. Thank you, President, for taking time out of your really busy schedule to be here with us, and we really appreciate it. The idea for this book started way back in 2020, which was in the middle of COVID. It seems like, I don't know, years and years ago now, and it's been a long time coming, but we made it over the line thanks to Dee and everyone in Mercier Press, and Mary Fian. Mary's not here tonight, but I just want to thank Mary, because I think we broke Mary's heart with typesetting the mathematical notation. She never complained. It was a very long and difficult process, because we challenging, yeah. But please thank Mary for her patience and for getting us through it. Thanks to the School of Mathematics for hosting us here tonight. Thanks to Kevin and Catherine McGuire, and the students Dara Hanrahan and Yvonne Ryan, who are here to help us as well. So it's a long time since I was a student in the maths department, it was called then. It wasn't the School of Mathematics then. I arrived in U.C.C. in 1984, and the Boole Library had opened the previous year in 1983, and I had no idea who George Boole was. It was just the guy that the library was called after. And I was doing a sort of a weird degree, because my primary degree was in maths and history. And the maths department was down by Jail Cross, and the history department was up by Hayfield Manor. So I spent years running up and down across the campus, passing the Boole Library, and occasionally going in there as well. But there was no statue of Boole outside at that stage. It was well, I didn't know, I was blissfully unaware anyway. And Des had taught me in first year and third year. He taught me algebra, and I know he's appalled by how little of it I can remember now. I think all the years of accountancy have just squashed it out of my brain. But I didn't know that while I was an undergraduate, Des had written the first biography of George Boole in 1985. Again, blissfully unaware of it. And then I sort of got a lucky break. I came back to do my master's after doing my hard dip, and I was speaking to Professor Brian Toomey, and he said to me, "Your degree is maths and history, you should go talk to Des, maybe something would work on George Boole." So that was my first lucky break on George Boole. And the second lucky break was that Des had insisted in 1984 that college buy a collection of papers belonging to George Boole in Sotheby's in London. Des threatened to mortgage his house if college wouldn't pay for them, so Anne, I sympathise. But the papers arrived just as Des was about to publish his book, so he never really had the chance to go through them for his first book. So when I rocked up to do my master's, it was just like manna from heaven for me. So I was given access to the papers, and in those days things were a lot more loosey-goosey in the library. It was like, here's a box, you can look at it. Now we'd be wearing the white gloves and the white cushions and everything. So I was very, very fortunate and very, very privileged to be able to access those papers, which had been collected mainly by Boole's sister around the time of Boole's death, before and afterwards, and they had sat in the box for years, and then suddenly there I was, 22 years of age, and told, off you go, so it was just a wonderful lucky strike to get. And then it happened again when we were writing the first book in 2016. There was a man called Arthur Conan in Lincolnshire who had collected papers belonging to George Boole, and then his son had taken them on his death, and then John Conan died. And he gave his papers to the Lincolnshire archives, and we heard about it. So again, the papers hadn't been archived, so I went over with my daughter Sarah, she was my research assistant, and we went over and were told, here, there's a box of papers, work away. So I mean, it was really, lightning striking twice, such a fortunate thing, because the Boole papers and the Conan papers are of such significance for Boole. They're, as a mathematician and a logician, but for me, what the most wonderful part was that they show him as a son, as a father, as a husband, because they're letters that he has corresponded with his close friends and family. And Des can tell you all about the importance of the mathematics, but for me, the most thrilling part was the importance of seeing him as a person. So Des, as the President said, Boole arrived here in 1849. He was the first Professor of Maths here in U.C.C. So it was just as the famine was ending in Ireland. So it was a terrible time, but a very interesting time to be writing about. And he wrote home about his family, about his classes, about his lodgings, about his social life, and a bit about college politics, which I'm sure doesn't happen anymore. Now, mind you, his letters to his mother and his sister, he was quite coy about Mary Everest. There wasn't much talk about her. She was the niece of one of his colleagues, John Ryle, and she sort of, there were the odd mentions, and then all of a sudden they got married in 1855 after Mary's father had died and Boole's mother had died. And I think it came as a bit of a shock to the family. But they got married in 1855, and between 1856 and 1864 they had 5 little girls, a little girl every second year, very even. And to me, that's the saddest part of the story. Boole was besotted by his daughters, the way he wrote to his friends about them. And his early death in 1864 was a huge loss to the world of mathematics, but a colossal loss to his family. I was a daddy's girl. I know what it's like. So those little girls, the eldest little girl was only 8 when her dad died. The youngest was 6 months. So they lost their father. And in those days, there was no widow's pension, so his wife was left, in very poor circumstances, so she had to take the girls back to England, where she was from, and she got a job as a librarian, and she used to run a boarding house for female students at Queen's College London. And I think growing up was quite difficult for the girls. Mary probably wasn't the easiest of characters. They had just lost their dad, and I think they had to fend for themselves quite a lot. But yet, as the President said, they shone. They shone in mathematics, they shone in literature, poetry, art, and science. And their generations continued to shine through up until, as we've heard, Geoffrey Hinton, their great-great-grandson, was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics last month. So the genes really worked through. And as well as being a devoted father, Boole was a dedicated teacher and professor. And we found some letters from his students that were contained in the Lincolnshire letters, and they wrote their affection and how good a teacher and how kind a teacher he was, that he tried to bring them along and to let them feel as if they were discovering the problems as he worked them out in the back on the blackboard, as opposed to just ramming it into them. And he welcomed students to his home. And that brings me to one of his successors, Des. Because when I did my master's in 1989, there were 3 of us, 1988-89, and Des wasn't well that year. He wasn't able to come to college. And that was before working at home was a thing. There was no such thing as working from home or remote working then. But Des used to have the three of us out to his home for lectures, which I think was well and beyond the call of duty then. And then I left college in 1989, and Des rang me in 2015. He said, it's the 200th anniversary of Boole's birth. We have to get back together working on a book. And we did, but I was very nervous. I had been out of college 26 years by that stage. But Des was always encouraging, and I was always made feel welcome in the home of Des and Anne, just as I had been back in the day. And I'd like to thank Anne and pay tribute to Anne as well, because Anne was always there, not just with numerous cups of tea, but she was always there when Des and I couldn't agree on a phrase, or agree on a word, or figure out Boole's handwriting. Anne was always the mediator between us. So thank you, Anne, for that. In fact, there's quite a lot of things that Des and I don't agree on. For example, he likes long sentences. I like short sentences. He likes hyphens. I like commas. I love dogs. And okay.
Footnotes.
But footnotes, yeah, I like footnotes. Des doesn't. But we never fell out, and Des continues to be a generous mentor to me. He's always been encouraging and gently pointing out any errors, and he strongly encouraged me, like hounding might be a bit too strong a word, to go back to college, but I did. And I'm loving it, and thanks to him. And even though I'm not working in Des's field anymore, he's always happy to read my work and to give me suggestions for my research. So thank you, Des. I've been lucky to work on George Boole, but extremely fortunate to have had Des as a teacher, a mentor, and a friend. And I just want to thank my own family, my husband Pat, my children John, Ruth and Sarah. Ruth's not with us, she's in Australia, and they've been very, very tolerant of me as well. They've often had me running late because I was spending too much time on the laptop. Dinners weren't always on time, and putting up with a lot of general nerdiness, so thank you for that. So again, thank you. Thank you all for coming on this miserable night. I hope you enjoy reading our book. I just want to wish you all a very happy Christmas.
Well done. It's perhaps ironic that the only feature of Cork that George Boole didn't really like was the weather. We have to pick a nice night, but thank you so much, all of you, for coming out. It's wonderful to see a crowd like this. Thank you all for coming, because I know it's not easy. Ógtráin, a Cohibri, Gwyniushla, agus a Cordi Galer. Is so coid an áhasach an lá aniu, a Givna George Boole. A fórbás, céad is a seasca blian ó hin, on Jerry Shock na Shakoi. Dominic Shola Lauer Simul Nua, the Essential George Boole, Logic, Love and Legacy, the Quid Yvonne Cohen agus MacHale, Tá Fulshatha ag Clómercia. Is ba Ashnesh Kuchianta an Lauer Shaw, a Runuk the Gokenia, K. Ka a Will Mathematical, no Nakwil. Tá Sulagam Guminishif Tanif as an Okoid Shaw, on Turnomish. President, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and friends, this gathering is a very joyful occasion to the memory of George Boole, who died 160 years ago this weekend. That's why we chose this particular date. We're launching a new and, to my mind, a very interesting book entitled The Essential George Boole, Logic, Love and Legacy. I think that subtitle was D's. Brilliant. Well done, Dee. Which has just been published by Mercia Press. It is a popular biography, suitable for anyone with an interest in Boole, whether they are proficient in mathematics or not. I hope you enjoy the occasion this evening. George Boole, who lived from 1815 to 1864, was the first professor of mathematics at Queen's College Cork, now University College Cork. And he got the job with very little secondary education and certainly no third level education or university degree. That would not have been possible nowadays, I think. This is a time of great celebration of Boole and several other things. And it was only when I began to jot them down that I realised just how many items relating to Boole we have to celebrate today. Let me list just a few of them. As I said, Sunday next, December 8th, is the 160th anniversary of Boole's untimely death. He died at the age of
49, very young. On Sunday morning next, as I have done for many years, I will lay some flowers at his grave beside St. Michael's Church of Ireland, Blackrock, just a few hundred metres from where I live. I will pray for him. There's religious views he might not like to be prayed for, but there's very little he can do about it at this stage. I often go to his graveside to tell him about the wonderful developments in technology, logic and mathematics that have stemmed from his work. Maybe he can hear me, you never know. That's the first thing we're celebrating. As is mentioned before, second thing we're celebrating is on Wednesday next, October the 11th, Professor Geoffrey Hinton, Boole's great-great-grandson, will be awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics in Stockholm for his work in artificial intelligence. George Boole has often been called the father of artificial intelligence, and Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather. Ironically, just a couple of years ago, Hinton resigned from Google to warn us of the dangers of AI, which he felt was taking over and controlling human beings. It seems the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 2024 was also awarded for work in AI. So certainly it's very topical at the moment. Professor Geoffrey Hinton arrived up at our house in Blackrock in April last. And you can see his picture there in the book. It's on page, what is it? Page 2 and 4, standing at the George Boole's grave at Geoffrey Hinton. Now, all happened so quickly and such a big thrill and rise at the time, but he was very anxious to actually see the grave. We took it for lunch. There's a short biography of Geoffrey Hinton in the book. I stayed with his family when I was writing the book on Boole, and they were extremely nice to me, extremely courteous. It took me a long time to write the Boole book, about, I suppose, 12 years, and after about 10 years I got a very curt letter from his father saying, "I hear you're spending your time writing books on Kerryman jokes. Stop that immediately and finish your work on Boole." Actually saying that there. He was right.
We wouldn't agree. Of course.
Mercy
The best-selling book of all time, I believe, with Mercy.
Until this one goes.
Of course.
Now, I've always been very suspicious of artificial intelligence. I really have. I feel human beings, and it's very interesting how Boole would have felt, because the computer stemmed from Boole's work, because Boole wanted to duplicate the workings of the human brain. How does the mind process thought? How does it process information? Can we discover that? Can we reduce it to mathematical equations? And then can we get a machine to perform the same task? Well, we've done it. And he actually met Charles Babbage, one of the inventors of the hardware of the computer, during his lifetime. And if they both had lived, we could have had a computer in the 19th century rather than the 20th and 21st century. But I've been always skeptical of artificial intelligence. We are superior to machines. I promised I never would become involved in it. But in the last few months, there was a problem I've been working on for many years on rings, Boolean type rings. I could not solve it. I spent many hours. And nobody else I know could solve it. Right? So it wasn't just that I wasn't able to do it, nobody else could do it either. But I happened to get in touch with an American mathematician, Professor Michael Kenyon of the University of Denver in Colorado. Saw his name on the, funny enough, I saw his name on the screen because he had a page on mathematical humour. I thought, this is interesting, so I bet it's all the stuff that I know already, but it wasn't. It was new individual mathematical humour he made up himself. Now, it wasn't, I wouldn't have said it was really very good humour, but it was humour and it was original. So I emailed him, and then I noticed in his CV that he did computer programs in algebra for proving algebraic theorems. I was very sceptical. So I just thought I'd tell him about the problem I've been working on for many years. And damn it, within a few weeks didn't he have his machine solved it. And not just that problem, but a dozen others in the same area. I was horrified in one way, but I was delighted in another way. And what happens is, the machine does it in thousands and thousands and thousands of steps. Some of them irrelevant, some of them unnecessary, some of them roundabout. And then what a human being does is scan the output and go right through and say, that's it, A to B, that's what we want. And that's what we're able to do. So we're working on publication now to publish this theorem, which is my first venture into artificial intelligence. And it is very scary. It really is scary. I think Geoffrey Hinton was right. We should be afraid of it. In fact, when Geoffrey Hinton came to our house, there was only one subject on which I felt I could argue with them on artificial intelligence, and that was humour. And I said, I don't think a computer will ever produce high quality humour or jokes. He said, we will. We're almost doing it, he said. We can get computers now to write the scenarios for jokes, really good scenarios, and develop them. They can't give punchlines yet. That's the stage they're at. I mean, the only example I knew of was most computer humor is about the level of a 5-year-old child. One joke was, why did the kid stick a knife in a packet of cornflakes? He wanted to be a serial killer. I mean, that's the level. Now, it's a mild little chuckle and maybe a 4-year-old finds it very funny, but that's as far as they've got. They're not down the road of really subtle. Humor is very, very, very subtle. It's a very subtle art form. And great comedians, to me, are great artists, and they're very clever people. I don't think they're ever going to make that. Should never say never. But that's something we had a good argument about, and it was the only thing I felt I could hold my own with. I wonder, would George Boole have been pleased that a difficult algebraic theorem in his area could be proved by a machine and not by a human being? It's a great question. And in what sense is the machine actually responsible for the proof? It just has been told what you can do and what you can't do. And it just does it. Doesn't know where it's going, doesn't know what it's doing. When it gets there, it knows it's got there, but that's it. Anyway, now, the next thing I have to celebrate is that University College Cork is currently in the process of appointing a Boole professorship in the School of Mathematics, Applied Mathematics and Statistics. This will be a prestigious appointment and will be filled by a candidate of very high merit and will link the name of Boole with U.C.C. in a very positive way. I remember proposing this many, many years ago, and I don't think anybody was very interested, but I think there's an enlightened administration now, and this is very good for our image. It would have a Boole professorship of mathematics. It's been done in other parts of the world. Cambridge would have a Newton professorship in physics. We will have a Boole professorship in mathematics.
Interviews next Friday. Interviews next Friday.
Interviews next Friday. Good. That's inside information. If you want to put your bets on now at this stage, when you got it.
And good Boolean logic, they were in line for the first one.
Oh, very good. Now, something else to celebrate. U.C.C. has a new Boole librarian, Coral Black. We welcome her warmly to the post. We're confident that she will promote the Boolean connections as her predecessor, John Fitzgerald, did. And Cork University Press, who have published so many books on George Boole and his family, have a new managing director, Sinead Neville. Again, we welcome her warmly to the post, and we're confident she will continue to promote Boole as her predecessor, Michael Collins, did. Another great cause for celebration at U.C.C. is the recent election of our Emeritus President, Dr. Michael Murphy, as Chancellor of the National University of Ireland. This is a very, very big honour and great prestige. Sadly, he cannot be with us. He would have loved to be here today, but he has a degree conferring ceremony tonight in Dublin as part of his new duties and couldn't be with us. He sends us his apologies and best wishes, and he is absolutely sure that Professor John O'Halloran will do a fine job. Michael Murphy has been a huge supporter of Boole ever since I remember him becoming president of U.C.C. and he oversaw the Boole bicentenary celebrations in 2015. Now, you've just heard Yvonne, and I cannot even begin to talk about Yvonne. Words fail me, because first of all, she has been accepted to study for a PhD in history at U.C.C. It's not easy, it's hard to get accepted as a postgraduate student. She has completed the first year of her course and is making rapid and significant progress. As she says, I don't know anything about her topic, but I'm always happy to read what she has written and to comment on it, and she is so industrious. Yvonne took my undergraduate lectures in mathematics and then did an MA thesis on George Boole under my supervision. She is the perfect graduate student, industrious, inventive, and organised. She's a joy to work with, not least because she can do all the technical bits that I can't do. Right? She also toned down my extreme language and harsh attitudes, very gently and very kindly. Now, wouldn't it be better if we said maybe now like this? I'm left to my own, I'm a total extremist, and I don't know how to tone myself down. I'd like to think that our books have a nice male/female balance. I think that both sides will come out. And sometimes when I'm reading a chapter of one of our books, I forget which one was the written it. And I think really we've written almost every sentence, because every sentence has been, and we would give chapters, take chapters to do, but then when we go over them, we would amend each other's work, amend each other's phrases, sentences, so that it just nicely blends into each other. In 3 decades of working together, we have never had a disagreement or row, as far as I know anyway, which must be a record of some sort. We've had discussions, heated discussions at times, but we always come to a conclusion. And I don't think either of us ever had to put our name to anything in any of our books that we didn't really want and agree with. And recently, Yvonne has had a best-selling book of her own, published by Cork City Library. It's a really wonderful book. It's great. Now she edited that. It's her dad's memoirs, which she found after his death, and she that's one of the most fantastic. He was a motorcyclist. Isn't that a fantastic photograph in the book? Isn't that great? And I think it's a lovely story of a young Jewish lad growing up in Cork City and his adventures and his attitudes, and it's a wonderful read. If you're from Cork, it's a wonderful read because it tells you what Cork was like, but also international because he travelled abroad quite a bit. And I would recommend very strongly, not just Yvonne, but that is a very, very good book, and it's doing very well. It's just sold a lot of copies as well. So thanks to the Cork City Library, and that was our first individual venture, and that's a difficult thing to do, to edit a book yourself for the first time and make many contributions. We're very grateful to Mercier Press for seeing this project to conclusion. Many of our long established friends there, Mary Feehan and John Spillane, and their new whiz kid head of books, G. Collins, they really have done a fantastic job and produced a really wonderful book under very difficult circumstances. And to give an editor a book with some mathematics in it to do is a very, very difficult and a mean thing to do, because it's like Chinese. You know, if you don't understand mathematics and mathematics notation, it's just like trying to decipher Chinese. I think it's a beautiful production. It has already been nominated by the Irish Examiner as one of the best Cork books of 2024. And in case you don't know it, Mercier have just opened a really beautiful new bookshop in Dillon's Cross. I've been there and it's absolutely beautiful. It's a lovely bookshop. You get a new bookshop in a city. It used to be a Mercier bookshop many years ago, of course. I urge you strongly to visit Dillon's Cross and browse. It's an excellent place to buy those books for Christmas presents.
Thank you.
Right, Dave?
Thank you.
Yvonne and I are very grateful to the School of Mathematical Sciences at U.C.C. for organising this event. In particular, Catherine Maguire, who can't be with us, unfortunately, school manager, and Kevin Hayes, head of school, have given us every help and facility and have cooperated in every way. We're also grateful to our President, John O'Halloran, for honouring us with his presence tonight. So how about a Boole Os? We could not have written this book over the last 4 years without the help and cooperation of our families. So thank you, Pat Moynihan and Yvonne and Pat's children, John, Ruth and Sarah. Sincere thanks to my wife Anne and our children Peter, Catherine, Simon, John and Dominic, and our grandchildren, of course, some of whom are here tonight. And in August 2024, we welcomed our 4th grandchild, Emily Ann, from Monica and Dominic. So it's been a good year for celebration. Although this is an occasion of great joy and celebration, it is also tinged with a great deal of sadness. Over the last few years, particularly over the last few months, the Grim Reaper has taken from us many of our colleagues here at U.C.C. It's quite awful the way that so many of my close friends have died. Many of these people played a significant part in the process of making the story of George Boole known to the world. I would have consulted with them, I would have discussed it with them. They all helped in their individual ways. So if I might just mention a few of them. We remember in particular Professor Tony Ryan, who lived in Boole's house, Litchfield Cottage, Ballintemple, and hosted many Boole gatherings and events there. He also wrote with Yvonne and myself several published articles on Boole's medical adventures. Tony is very, very sadly missed, a lovely man. We mourn the loss of our beloved colleagues Kathleen O'Sullivan and Gabriel Doherty. Gabriel supervised with me PhD thesis on the mathematical career of Eamon de Valera. Not too long ago, we lost Professor Chris Williams, the great John A. Murphy, and recently Professor Eamon O'Carrigan. These are all people I knew very well, and Professor Maura Mulcahy. I have a particular fondness for Maura Mulcahy for a certain reason. She was the chairman of the board where I got my first job at U.C.C. And you never forget the kindness you get in a situation like that, because that's one of the most nerve-wracking experiences that any academic goes through, your first interview for a job, and especially if you get it. So I remember Maura, but I remember as well as a lovely lady and very fondly too. Professor Paddy Barry wrote the first book on Boole, and his wife Fran was my PhD student in mathematics. Let me show you some of these books. In physics, we lost Tony Deeney and Neil O'Murrochoo. Neil and I collected in 1984 3,000 student signatures and 500 staff signatures petitioning that the U.C.C. governing body called the new library the Boole Library. And they agreed, which is great. Now, the real miracle there was to get 500 U.C.C. staff members to agree on anything. I've never known any other situation in which this happened. From the mathematics department, we lost Professor Gerard Murphy and Yvonne Vernon and her husband Peter Vernon, great friends of mine. I really miss Dr. Sean Pettit. I don't know if you remember Dr. Sean Pettit, the historian. Now, he was the first person to introduce me to Boole. Because I was sitting in the common room one day, it was 1974, and having coffee with Sean Pettit, and he said he was doing his PhD on the history of Queen's College Cork, and it was just about to be finished. And he said, I just discovered, he said, some letters of George Boole in the archives underneath the archway. There was a box of letters of Boole that had lain there for well over 150 years. Nobody had seen them. Would you be interested in looking? I said, I'd love to look at them. So I started to look at them and thought maybe I could write a little article on this. So I started a little article, and the little article became a big article, and the big article became a short book, and the short book became a long book, and then the long book became about 4 or 5 other books. So just from that one incident where Sean Pettit told me that he found those letters, and there were mundane sort of letters, and letters to the governing body, saying that the chimney in his lecture room was smoking quite a lot. And he couldn't give lectures. Would it be possible to have some come and clean the chimney? That type of letter. Very human, very nice, but just shows you what was going on there. There were also 2 other people, Dr. Joe Manning of the Computer Science Department and Dr. David Flannery, both of whom were students of mine. And let us not forget Gerard Feehan, Mary Feehan's brother, a very good friend of mine, possibly Cork's greatest football and hurling supporter, whom you probably saw on television many times. Fortunately, Mary can't be with us tonight, but we'll remember her. Mary has been a friend of mine since 1974. She was my editor in Burning Books. So may they all rest in peace and rise in glory. Now, I'd like to say just a few words about the vast amount of literature that now exists concerning George Boole and his family. This is distinct from the huge number of academic texts on Boole's work in Boolean algebra, invariant theory, differential equations, difference equations, operator theory, theoretical computer science, logic, electronic circuits, etc., etc. So let me just show you, just to let you know that there are lots and lots of books that you can look at, or that you can buy, or that you can be aware of, because I think it's very important for us to know that people have actually spent the time on the work. The first book written in Boole is by my former professor Paddy Barry, who was a wonderful man. He was my head of department for 30, 40 years, and I think it's unique to be able to say that in those 40 years of teaching, I don't remember a single unpleasant incident, argument, or row in the department. Or what other department in any university in the world could say something like that? He was a perfectionist as far as being a head of department, as well as being a brilliant mathematician. And he edited the first known book on George Boole back in 1964. Then I wrote the first full-length biography of George Boole, 1984-85. And it was reprinted in 2015 for the Boole Bicentenary. Right. This is a book of the correspondence between Boole and Augustus de Morgan, mathematician in London, about mathematics and about various other things, about health and about life in college. Then there was a book called The Booles and the Hintons. This is the family, Boole's family and his son-in-law's family. Strange people, some of them, but this is by Jerry Kennedy, who was a descendant of Boole's brother Charles. Right. Then was the first book that Yvonne and I did together, George Boole, New Light in George Boole, which really was I mean, you finish what you think is a complete biography, there's maybe 500 pages. You then produce a 550-page book on the same topic. You think, where the hell was all that information? And I'm sure there's just as much left if any of you wants to do some more. I had a letter the other day, an email the other day, from a gentleman in Chile with a query on George Boole. They said, I'm writing a new biography of Boole, would you help me out? So there's somebody in Chile who's just decided to write. And he won't put in the stuff that we've got, because that's all known already. He'd dig up new information. And again, I wouldn't like to be starting all over again, but it's great to see somebody doing something like that. This is another book written by a U.C.C. professor, Brendan Dooley. This is a fantastic book, which is not well known, I'm afraid. It's called The Continued Exercise of Reason, and it's all Boole's public addresses, all the public lectures he gave during his lifetime. Wonderful stuff from the Boole papers that we got from Sotheby's and Rods, and with commentary. And he's a medieval historian who decided, well, let's do this. Hasn't been done. It was something I often thought of doing, but now it's been done for me, which was a good feeling. Then during the lockdown, I asked myself, is there any other project I could do? And I realised that George Boole had written a lot of poetry. So I wrote a book called The Poetry of George Boole, and about 70 poems in there. There's some stories in there as well, because when they got married, his wife found some of them and said, what are these? He said, poems. You shouldn't be using your great mind to write poetry. And she took it and threw it into the fire. Burned all the papers that she got. And it seems he had good and obedient husbands, as we all are. He did not write a single word of poetry after that.
Wow.
Right. And now, he did write some love poems to her earlier on, but never been able to find them. Now, maybe she burned those or not, I don't know. Maybe she found it too embarrassing. But if you ever come across the love poetries of George Boole, I'm the first person. This is produced by Logic Press, and I think it's a lovely book. And I've also put quite a bit in there on the connections between beauty and mathematics. Because a lot of people, if you say beauty and mathematics in the same sentence, they just laugh at you. They say, you weren't in our school. And I think there is great beauty within mathematics. It's a pity that we don't have the ability or the time to tell people about that. And I know that anybody I've ever met who's a mathematician had a teacher who brought out the beauty of the mathematical subject for them. And that's why they're mathematicians. I had one teacher, Brother George Sheridan, who was a De La Salle brother, and he showed me how beautiful mathematics was in secondary school. And that, I owe my career to him. So mathematics can be beautiful, music can be beautiful, poetry can be beautiful. They're all different types of beauty. Now there's an awful lot written on the Boole sisters, the Boole girls. There's a book for children written on the 5 Boole girls. If you have a little girl who's interested in that type of thing, it's cheap. It's only €2 or €3, I think, and it's very nice. That you got a novelist, you got a scientist, you've got a musician there, you've got all sorts of people. And final book I want to show you, just got this as a present from my son Simon just a few weeks ago. This is called the Voynich manuscript. You may have heard of it. Now, Boole's youngest daughter, Ethel Lillian Boole, married a man called Voynich, a Polish count, and he was a rare book collector. And he found this manuscript in Italy, dating, we think, from about 1500. And it's a total mystery. Now, it's been reproduced in an absolutely beautiful new facsimile edition, like that. But nobody can understand it. Is it in code? Is it a hoax? Every person in cryptology in the world has a go at it. Nobody's made any sense of it. It's in the Yale University Library. It's now being reproduced as a book. Look at that. Is it a hoax? If it's a hoax, it's a very, very elaborate hoax. Nobody knows what it means. But here now is stemming from George Boole, his daughter and his son-in-law. We've got this fantastic book here. It's in German and English, and you can never go deciphering it. If you can decipher it, yeah.
I have a question. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
One thing I learned once upon a time was if you want new ideas, go and look where nobody else is looking and you might find something different.
That's true.
And my question to you is, what have you learned? You were talking about Boole, being interested in learning, and
Yeah.
is there something that struck you that he knew about learning that maybe we can use as an opportunity as students today?
Well, I would say one word, just one word. That's abstraction. To me, abstraction is the most powerful. Thank you, John.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Thank you.
What do we mean by that?
Abstraction, that you learn to look at things outside of their context, outside of their material form, just the purity of the idea. If you can go for that, and that's what Boole taught me. And funnily enough, I had a little of this in my own mind even before I read Boole. If you can reduce it to its absolute essence, take away all the trimmings, all the pictures, all the colours like that. Anyway, that's a discussion we'll have again.
So
Okay.
you put it in a different context then, is it?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay. There's also, by the way, a film on the internet. I forget the exact title. I don't remember. But we made it here in Cork in the centenary year, but on Boole's life, and it's you can view it for free on YouTube. Finally, what did George Boole achieve? Now, if somebody asks you, what did Boole do? What I would say is, he turned logic into mathematical symbols. You say all A is B, all B is C, therefore all A is C, that type of thing. That's prose. He turned that into mathematical symbols, algebraic symbols, which are independent of language, independent of context, and also independent of nationality and culture. Which led to the digital computer, automatic thought, and artificial intelligence. But he's also been called the founder of pure mathematics. That's a huge title to give anybody. He a contributor to geometry and group theory, and the father of computer science. For me, the highlight of our newer book, just give you 3 highlights before I finish. A discussion of the theory that Boole was the inspiration for Professor James Moriarty, the arch-villain of Sherlock Holmes stories. Now you see a picture in the book of Boole and Moriarty, and I think that from that they look very alike. It's on page 171. Do you think that Boole and Moriarty could have been the same person? Some people do, some people don't. So that's one highlight. Another highlight is a simple account. Now the president said he couldn't understand it, but I say a simple account of Boolean algebra and truth tables. I think that's understandable by anybody who can operate the 0-1 switch on an electric kettle. You have an electric kettle? You know that when you press it down, you get a 1 and it's on, and you press it up, it's a 0 and it's off. You understand that, you can understand Boolean algebra and truth tables.